Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is January again. June. That's the other one with the J. Yes, that's right. I'm making that mistake a lot. J-U-N is different from a J-A-N, and it's awfully warm outside for January. But, climate change, I figured, maybe was responsible for this. I don't know. I guess this is just the ultimate manifestation of I don't know what day it is, quarantine situation. But here we are. Daily Co's Radio is live, and it is actually this day and not a different one. And let me make sure I can share with you all Bill's morning comment on the situation. Today, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, explores the effectiveness of John Bolton's new book as a doorstop. The results will shock you. It's doing terribly because I don't have the book. And I probably won't have the book, but it is a 500-page volume, as I understand it. If you get it in electronic form, also lousy doorstop, also may ruin your doorstop, by the way. So don't depend on it, friend. In fact, don't even depend on it for the truth of finding out what happened inside the Trump administration. I'm not sure we're going to get that. I don't really have any particular reason to believe that John Bolton isn't telling the truth about what he says happened inside the Trump administration. It's frustrating and annoying because, one, it won't matter. Two, he should have said something when he had the chance. Three, it bothers me that he would profit from all of this. Four, I don't know, he's John Bolton, and I always thought he was a nutcase, and he still is, but maybe he's telling the truth about another nutcase, and the enemy nutcase of my other enemy nutcase is my nutcase friend, I guess. I don't know what that has not worked out particularly well for people historically. But it's very troublesome because there's massive evidence of enormous crimes against the country, perpetrated really by both of them, quite honestly. And, it bothers me because I'm thinking ahead in time and I realize it will never get the comeuppance that he will never get. Neither of them will ever get the comeuppance they deserve. Quite honestly, Trump is such an enormous traitor to the country. He is, as I've said many times, a real live electric chair level traitor. And I can't imagine ever being satisfied with a just outcome from his presidency because I feel that it requires his execution for me to feel better. And, that's honestly a pretty good reason, I think, to bring the ultimate punishment to bear. I'll feel a lot better. I think that's. I think I'm in line with the majority of his backers, certainly. Right? Everyone else can get what they want out of everything, and to hell with everyone else. That's what I want. Well, anyway, we're probably not going to get it, and a number of our listeners to the show oppose capital punishment in all situations, and so I don't want to make anybody agitated about this. But, so I'll back off on this. I will de-escalate. Unlike the cop who did not get her Egg McMuffin fast enough yesterday. I'm still thinking about that, and it occupies far too much space in my head. Too many ridiculous examples of things gone wrong to go through in the last 6 hours. You could do a whole show about all the things that have probably gone wrong. But that's still occupying some space in my head, and it's troublesome. Maybe I can spit that out and get that over with. But it occurs to me that as we're wondering whether or not we can reform, retrain, something else the police instead of the unfortunately poorly received slogan of defunding the police, and maybe we can just train everybody or have different people or have social workers there to help do the de-escalation. And something has to change because, like I said, she can't even de-escalate a drive-through breakfast order. I'm worried about where we're going as a society, and it occurs to me that, yeah, these are the people, police. Not all cops are exactly like her, obviously, and please, we don't even want to start down the not all anybody road this early in the morning. But these are the folks that when they come to courtrooms to clean up their mess, we're told that it would be a reasonable thing to do to take their word for it when they tell you that they killed somebody, shot at somebody, did something for which they have to answer because they had a reasonable fear for their life. And we're watching of it. This isn't a deposition that was taken against her will. This is something that she willingly recorded for posterity. She wanted everybody to know what her thought process was. We're supposed to think that these people who are, and now she does make a somewhat universal claim that they're all under so much stress and they all can't take it, and and you don't hear thank you enough anymore. I'm not sure how that got in there. That seemed like now that was a de-escalation, I thought, of the problem. They were reducing everything to whether or not people say thank you to them. But these are the folks whose judgment we're supposed to accept when the question is, did they have did they reasonably fear for their lives? And I mean, I'm just like thinking through this whole situation. Maybe it's good. Maybe she did de-escalate. She just drove away and made a video. That's a de-escalation. And I'm serious about that. I read for my gun fail project, I don't know how many stories I read about people who got frustrated with fast food workers at drive-thrus or at the counter and pulled guns on them. People sent those stories to me all the time. It doesn't count as a gun fail unless they accidentally fired the weapon during the exchange, and it has to be an accidental firing. You can't intentionally shoot a fast food worker and have it qualify as a gun fail. We have very stringent standards at gun fail. And but it happens all the time. People pull guns on fast food workers because they're frustrated about everything, which tells you that tells you that there's too many guns in the country and in circulation, but also tells you that there's widespread frustration with how long it takes to get supposedly fast food sometimes. So I'm glad she drove away rather than produce a gun. But had she produced a gun and the thing's escalated and she ends up shooting somebody, does she or someone like her end up in court somewhere saying, testifying, look, the court should find that this is a good shoot, as they say in the cop shows? I don't know whether cops really say that among themselves. But is that a good shoot because she reasonably feared for her life? The whole thing started because the Egg McMuffin was a supposed assassination attempt. They weren't making it in front of her, which never happens. And it was late because it was obviously being poisoned to kill her. And she could walk into a courtroom anywhere and say, I'm an officer of the law, and raise her right hand and say, I shot those McDonald's employees because I reasonably feared for my life. And any reasonable person in my situation would have feared for their lives, especially if they were in a frontline position like me, identified as somebody who professionally fears for their life. I don't know. It worries me a great deal about how many more of them are out there walking on edge, and how many of these cops. The fact that she sat down and made the video tells you that at least at the moment she was pretty sure she was right about the deadly threat posed by the delay to her Egg McMuffin, and that's alarming, to say the least. In the meantime, the chief executive officer of the United States of America is similarly demented and paranoid, and but this one has a whole press apparatus designed to normalize everything that he does, and it's working overtime. Greg has identified some of the examples of that. I don't know if that's on your agenda for discussion, but I have seen you doing that this morning on Twitter. Now we'll talk to you by Skype and get the updates. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. And this is a morning show, and so David is continuing with his breakfast theme for the week.
Breakfast is a great meal to have at any time of day, like this cop.
But anything could happen. You know, the thing that I'm going to segue into, which is peripherally related, is the blue flu, the Atlanta police officers walking out in a protest.
Just the flu, Greg.
Because Rayshard Brooks was killed by a cop, and the cop is being taken to task. And interestingly, the tie-in with what you were just saying is that when the Attorney General was discussing why charges are being brought, one of the examples he used is that after Brooks was shot, one of the cops yelled out, "I got him," which apparently not just on cop shows, they actually do in real life.
I got him.
And they were making the point that this was not a deposition lawyered up. This was this is how I felt at the time, and expressed so that people could hear it, because I guess it was on camera of some sort, whether it was a I don't know if that particular one was on body cam or iPhone next to the situation.
It's an excited utterance. It's a hearsay exception. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you wouldn't need it, but yeah, go on.
You wouldn't need it. Well, you'd think. Who knows? The cops in Atlanta think that's not good enough because they walked out in apparent protest and skipping the part about kicking him while he was down, while he was bleeding, and standing on him while he was down, while he was bleeding. So, a lot going on there. But
Yes.
just making the point that when you make these utterances, they sort of count.
Yeah. I don't know what to say beyond that. I mean, that's really remarkable. And yeah, again, another of our police departments insisting that the real victims are of course, the police. And for people protesting to get rid of all the cops, defund them,
the cops got this
retrain
shoe.
them,
Do you know how expensive shoes are to replace?
Yes, right. I know the prices are rising these days. A lot of shoe factories were closed during the pandemic. There might be a shoe shortage. You don't know. So you protect the goods that you have in a pandemic.
Meanwhile, while we're talking about all of this, breaking news, 1.5 million new unemployment claims filed last week.
And they're all
so
cops.
The idea that the pandemic is over and we're all opening up and things are great, not yet.
Yeah. How many of them are cops who have walked off the job? Do they count? Do they get unemployment insurance?
I don't know. So that's one of the big stories this morning. Okay. Obviously, what's going on in Atlanta and the writ large Black Lives Matter situations going on, the pandemic. And now we have John Bolton's book. We have to spend at least a few minutes talking about the mustache.
Sure.
Not that he's worthy, but it's weird. It's just so odd because his book is attempting to be suppressed by the federal government's attempting to suppress it. Obviously, it hasn't worked because people have copies on it and they're starting to write about what's in it. so the case is stupid.
Yeah.
It's not prior restraint when you've already written about it.
Okay.
And I expect them to lose because they don't really have a leg to stand on. But here's the headline in the Washington Post, for example. Trump asked China's Xi to help him win re-election, according to Bolton book. And Peter Baker and some of the regulars on the beat were saying, well, this just confirms what we already knew, but it's nonetheless remarkable and astounding. And no, it really isn't, because it just confirms what we knew.
Yes.
Jonathan Bernstein, political scientist, makes the point that this isn't even something that's necessarily at all the same as Ukraine. This is just incompetence.
Oh, well, which thing?
Right. Ukraine was trying to get dirt on an opponent.
Yeah.
This is help me win re-election. I will, I'll give you a good deal on soybeans or whatever.
Yeah.
So not even in the same ballpark.
No.
But Bolton says it was a much bigger pattern, and the Democrats screwed up because they didn't include this thing that you didn't know about, and I refuse to tell you.
Well, they didn't include it. They went for the narrow idea, which people debated at the time, and of course, John Bolton had no intention of helping them widen it
whatsoever.
Anyway,
he had no intention of helping them, and so he looks like a fool. What he's telling people is stuff we now already know. It didn't help, so he looks not like a hero. Like, he doesn't look like Fiona Hill. He doesn't look like a truth teller.
He doesn't look like her.
He looks like a greedy scumbag who's trying to make some money out of being fired. And Trump, of course, doesn't look good. And he's claiming that Bolton was a has-been anyway. Who would listen to him? And of course, but you hired him.
Right. People are puzzling over this. Well, why did he hire him then? Yeah, the guy's an idiot.
For those who actually care about this stuff,
here's
Ellie Honig writing in CNN, John Bolton betrayed his country. That's all true.
He did.
The politics part of it is covered by the Bulwark, Jim Swift writing. Trump defenders tie themselves in knots over Bolton book, while the Trump apologists expect members of Congress to profess ignorance. Well, I didn't read that piece.
All right,
I didn't hear about it.
I don't know.
I didn't see it. Right. I'm not saying. I'm late for lunch, the usual stuff. And while all of that is going on, I think it kind of overshadows and overlooks a very important point made by Seth Maskett, political scientist, which is simply this. The Senate GOP could have removed Trump for inviting foreign interference in a U.S. election. As a bonus, the government would have handled the pandemic crisis better. More Americans would now be alive. The GOP would be facing a better fall election environment.
Maybe.
But the point is, they didn't. There is nothing Bolton would have said that would have convinced Republicans in the Senate to remove Trump.
No. They would have
Their
said he's lying.
own existence is tied to him. They're bound to him. Without him, they lose. They're going to lose anyway. But without him, they lose. They thought at the time. And there was no way, no matter what he did, they were going to remove him. I will remind our audience and myself, perhaps myself more than our audience already knows this, that at the time, reporters were saying, well, off the record, we talked to Republican senators who said, yeah, the House proved their case. It wasn't a question of adding other stuff. They didn't need other witnesses. They proved everything they said. We just didn't think it was worth impeaching him over and removing him.
That's true. They did say, and a lot of them also spent time arguing, you proved that he did these things, but we're telling you these are things presidents are allowed to do.
We're allowing him to do.
Right. Well, yes. I mean, that's the same thing for them.
For them, right? So the idea that, if only Bolton had testified at the time, everything would be different is absurd.
Well, that's
They
true.
already made up their mind. This is what was going to happen because it was in their own best interest to do so. Screw the country. That's not what we're doing here. We're here to get ourselves reelected. That's job one. And removing Trump doesn't help us with job one, so we're not doing it.
Yeah. Well, bad.
Now, if it infuriates you all over again just because of that, great.
It does. Oh, good. All right.
Fine.
Awesome.
But don't fool yourself into thinking that somehow or other, if Bolton had only done this or done that, everything would have been different. Nothing would have been different.
That is, I think I will agree with that. That sounds true to me.
Okay, good.
All right, good. Yes.
Josh Jordan, my conservative friend who occupies the space of the Romulan neutral zone for polling, says Joe Biden opens up his biggest lead over Donald Trump since early December, now up to 8.5 points on the RCP average. More importantly, Biden is again over 50%, with 8% still undecided or third party. At this point in 2016, Hillary led by 5.8, and she would win the popular vote by 2, but she wasn't near 50.
Yes.
I would add that. So that's different. And, of course, there's a very stable lead, whereas Clinton versus Trump in 2016 was up and down, with at times getting close to 1. There was even a brief period that Trump led before Hillary led again, and then she finally won the popular vote. Yeah. But this is a completely different year, and so we're going to go over that yet again, and I'll tell you why. Let me give you some nice pieces from Politico, nice in the sense of proving my point. If you were thinking that somehow or other Trump sinking in the polls and being a bad bet for re-election and having the entire presidential race decided by September 1st, if you thought all of that was going to change Politico's approach to the presidency, you'd be wrong.
Okay.
Let me give you some headlines here.
I'll think about that. Yeah, go on.
This is 6/17/2020, so June 17th. That would be from yesterday. Trump has a point about the polls. Some pollsters are still grappling with the same problems that plagued battleground state surveys 4 years ago. Polling errors are not uncommon in presidential elections, but pollsters see a real risk this year that the mistakes of 2016 will be repeated. Actually, pollsters don't really worry about that.
They do see a risk, but it's a standard
deviation. They see a risk, but they think that they fixed a lot of the problems. But that's okay. It's Politico. Here's another one.
3.5%.
This is today. John Harris.
Yes.
One of the founders. Here's how Trump could beat the rap on the pandemic.
As the founders intended.
COVID-19 may not be the end of Trumpism after all. The only person who said it would be the end of Trumpism actually is John F. Harris. He had a previous article that said that. We think that Trump will be defeated, but Trumpism will stick around because the Republican Party is Trump and Trump is the Republican Party. See the senators deal with the impeachment issue.
That's a thing. I mean, that could be. We do make the point fairly often that this isn't. You get rid of Trump, you're still stuck with the rest of these idiots.
Not one bad apple.
Yes. Right.
It's one bad apple spoils the bunch.
That is. He is bad, apple-wise, and everything else.
In his own public statements, Harris writes, in decisions in late February and early March, the New York governor, Cuomo, was no more prescient about the magnitude of the disease or fast acting in response than Trump was. It was his state that leads the nation by far in COVID-19 deaths, especially as the virus raced through state-regulated nursing homes. Yet the news media threw bouquets to Cuomo over his performance while amplifying every Trump misstep, his ludicrous assertion about coronavirus in the winter that we have it totally under control, while minimizing progress on the amount of testing and distribution of ventilators. Trump let the states primarily run their states, said Nathan Birch of Missouri, and lead pastor at Aurora Baptist Temple. Missouri is not New York. We don't talk like they do. We don't act like they do. We don't dress like they do. And we're not densely populated like they are. And that leads to the second set of Trump defenses, which might be lumped together as relativism. Defenders see Trump as being judged constantly by an absolute standard that's unrealistic. Defenders resent what they regard as a sanctimonious pose of politicians, yada, 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 because they hold Trump to higher standards than they hold themselves.
Sure.
Like, look at New Zealand. How can you hold it up to New Zealand or Germany or the United Kingdom, you know?
Yeah, United Kingdom, which is failing horribly, but still in better shape by far.
It's incredibly roundabout writing, which basically says, listen, we're not going to blame Trump because we hate New York. Why don't you just say that?
Yeah.
That may be true, but Cuomo's not running.
That will be of limited effect then.
Well, Biden's running, and you know what? People like him, and there's nothing you could do about it, so you're wrong about that.
Yeah.
And the other idea, of course, is that it kind of skips the point that the pandemic is actually getting worse in red states right now. Here's Axios, for example. Oklahoma among the states with highest coronavirus case growth. And, of course, Arizona, Texas, and Florida are all going off the charts. Now, I noted this morning that it is often difficult to play armchair epidemiologist with these things for a various sundry number of reasons. We talked about this on the show, I think, yesterday or the day or on Monday.
Or every day.
When you're looking at a state and trying to figure out what does it mean that the cases are going up.
Yeah.
All of the states are looking at it differently and have different data, and it's really hard to compare apples to oranges. Some will tell you about what their ICU looks like and whether it's full. Some won't, for example, and that's one of the more important things. And yet, within each state, there are specific populations that if you don't know about, you don't really have a sense of what's going on. We talked about prisons, for example. We talked about nursing homes. The elderly, obviously, is a big issue in Florida, yet right now it's being driven by younger people. But here's a story out of Oregon. Church tied to Oregon's large new coronavirus outbreak.
Yes.
So if you're talking about churches, for example, versus prisons, those are different animals, and it's going to affect the public differently. It's going to affect the perception of the public differently. It's going to affect which race is involved here. You know, black and brown people in prison versus white people in church. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff tied on with there, which if you don't know the details, makes it really hard to talk about the outbreaks and what they mean. Are we talking about meatpacking plants? Are we talking about churches? Are we talking about prisons? Or are we talking about being on the beach? You know, some people are involved if you're talking about a prison. Tons of people are involved if you're talking about a church, because everybody, you know, goes to church in a state. At least it theoretically could affect everybody, whereas prisons is a limited population and so on and so forth. So if you don't know those things,
although
some places, it's really hard to interpret them.
I would bet there are more people in prison than in church in some of these places.
Maybe, but you know, we're talking about public's perception of, is it affecting my state?
Right. And
if you're in South Dakota and you're reading that the only people who are getting sick are in meatpacking plants and they happen to be Latino, that's a very different political push than my local church got it and my pastor got it and now I may get it.
That's absolutely true. And the church ones are the only ones that they're likely to think of as valid data. I mean, a lot of people keep insisting that they don't have it in their state. To the point where actually a lot of the fighting over mass is about whether I have to wear it at church. They're just not saying it. Yeah, that's true too. And this has always kind of been my fear as the disease numbers grow in these, I guess, in red states, that your typical suburban, exurban, rural observer is saying, even if I acknowledge that these numbers are true, they're happening in places I have nothing to do with. I'm not going to be there. I don't know anybody there.
Right. And my contention is over time that
and
disappears. It was true in the beginning, but it's no longer as true now. And the further we get in this, the more true what I think I said turns out to be.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't get to them through
I'm
the
less
churches,
wrong about it every day.
I don't know what to tell you. Okay. Well, that's good. Congratulations. Except for the whole deaths and stuff.
Right. Except for that part. Now, here's another one. This is from Florida. South Florida hospitals will be extremely reluctant to again cut back on elective procedures and surgeries if it comes to that. It's how they make their money and the reason they've been able to save jobs.
Okay.
This is in the Palm Beach Post. Okay.
Yeah.
So hospitals make their money from elective surgery. If they cut elective surgery, they don't make money. They don't want to do that. So the bean counters are very unhappy about that. The infectious disease people say, look, we're having a surge here. You better do it. And they're going to say, okay, but not for the last minute. We already did that last time and we got clobbered. We're not doing it again unless you force us. And the numbers may force them. But if you're then going to turn and say, okay, well, the more accurate thing to follow is how full are the ICUs, not how many cases you have. But it turns out the ICUs are still full because they're doing elective surgery and other things that are non-COVID related, then again, it becomes harder to interpret that particular number. That's what I'm saying. So I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. I'm saying if you're trying to compare one state to another state and one state has a policy of cutting back elective surgery and the other doesn't, and then you look at the one statistic you get from both states, which is ICU percentage occupied, it's really hard to compare them.
Yeah, I guess so. You'll have to pare down, and then you have to have officials who are willing to do that sort of analysis.
Well, then that's the next thing I'm getting to. So the next thing in my little tweet chain this morning about this was from Stephanie Rule pointing out questions about liability and a lack of clear guidelines around the coronavirus pandemic are creating uncertainty for businesses as they move forward. So if the pressure from businesses is to cook the books, like in Florida where the data person got fired, how do you know what's going on? It's just really tough to know. All I'm telling you is that it's all going to come out in the end because the virus doesn't care.
I guess not. And neither does the data person in Florida, by the way, who has set up her own website and is still measuring all of the data that she can get her hands on and putting it out for people to analyze, which is kind of
God bless the data collectors given all of this. That was how I concluded my tweet story.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg's got more, so let's keep going.
Well, again, I want to get back to Harris and Politico, right? Because the whole point of his story is don't worry about the pandemic. It's not going to have the effects that Trump said. And he's a perfect example, just as Politico is a perfect example of, despite all the data Trump's going to win, he is a perfect example of, I do political analysis for a living and I don't understand pandemics at all. So I'm going to give you my opinion of how the pandemic is playing.
All right.
And since I don't know anything about it, I'll just look at it from a political point of view. I'll use last week's data and last month's impressions to give you today's story about how it doesn't really matter in rural areas because everybody hates Andrew Cuomo. The fact of the matter is the virus doesn't care. It's a big problem in places like Arizona and Florida, which, by the way, are sort of important for this year's election. And the fact that Oklahoma is spiking at a time that Trump is there for a rally just puts the lie to Harris's whole theme. It's a local story. The Tulsa News is all over this. The idea that it doesn't matter and it's happening in some faraway place is just stupid, but then again, it's Politico.
Yeah. Well, what can you do? This is the nature of the viruses. We've learned that, again, people can't wait 2 weeks to find out whether something they want to talk about now is true, and that's
I have an
a big
opinion.
part of the way it
Why should I wait for the
spreads.
data?
Yeah, right. I'm singing and playing a guitar and dancing with my pink-hatted MAGA hat friends, and we lived through the night. Therefore, that's it. It's one of the videos circulating now. Is I don't know, a couple of young women waiting in line for the for the rally already.
Yeah.
I mean, it's several days ahead, and they're singing and playing guitar, and they look like they're having a great time. And what can I tell you? As a human being, we're supposed to say, I hope they all
But Jim
don't
Langford
die
said it's hot out
from
there. You shouldn't be
coronavirus.
standing out there. It's too hot
Well, that's
to have these things
why
outside.
it's so healthy and safe, because the warm weather is getting rid of the
Then have the
coronavirus.
rally outside. Well, you can't. It's too hot. So
Yeah.
Zeke Emanuel says, new
tell you.
study in Health Affairs data suggests that the 15 states and D.C. that mandated mask wearing in public between April 8th and May 15th averted as many as 230 to 450,000 COVID-19 cases. Wear your mask, keep your distance. It's not politics, it's science. And yet we have this rally going on when it shouldn't.
Right.
That's politics and not science.
That is happening. That is scientifically true.
And don't forget, I think we talked about this the other day. It isn't just Harris's article. Politico also had, we're thinking landslide beyond D.C. GOP officials see Trump on glide path to re-election. Conventional
Right.
indicators suggest the president's bid for a second term is in jeopardy, but state and local GOP officials see a different election unfolding. I'm looking at this and thinking about the Bolton situation and how it wouldn't have affected how Republican senators voted anyway, because they have their own interests in mind. And just musing about what are those interests. And I have to tell you, it's really hard to not think that every Republican senator is relying on the Russians and the Chinese to get themselves reelected.
I guess so.
Because if you look at it that way, everything they do makes sense.
I still feel like it doesn't, but it does explain a few.
Well, we're not going to expose anything. We're not interested in anything. We don't want to see anything. They're helping us too.
I guess so.
If we take this whole pathway down, we're cutting off our money.
Yeah,
We're all Dana
if they know
Rohrabacher.
that. Yeah, and there's how many of them are there? There's 220 people I think get paid by the Russians. Swear to God, you can put me on tape with this.
Exactly. I mean, and why is Rohrabacher so different?
I don't know.
No, it'd be
To get to the other side.
responsible not to speculate. But you look at their actions and say, why are they doing this? Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You'd think ordinarily the first answer is self-preservation, but then of course you're watching what's happening. That's not really either. That can't be why they're doing it, or it's just not working very well. I don't know.
And the weird thing, speaking about Politico, is that separately, Politico is pretty bearish on the GOP retaining the Senate.
Okay.
Right? I mean, they have this 5-minute video summary of what's going on right now.
They do.
And it's entitled, There's Almost No Good Senate Election News for the GOP.
Okay.
So they're bullish on Trump winning and bearish on the GOP holding their majority. And I'm thinking it's the other way around, actually. But although I think both are in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a weird.
But I think Trump has a bigger chance of losing than the Republicans do of losing their majority. It can happen. It might happen. But everything has to go right for the Republicans to lose a majority. Right now, we're on a glide path to Trump losing.
Yeah. It is interesting just how many of the Republicans, I guess, think that they'll be saved by clinging to him. And I guess clearly they have learned nothing about Donald Trump and the way he operates. But I think that all evidence indicates that if there really is a massive cheating operation underway, and maybe Russians or Chinese or somebody is behind it or funding it, or I don't know what exactly, but all evidence is that he will use every drop of that resource for himself and maybe even take extra delight in cutting everyone else out of the deal so that you twist in the wind and are defeated and he's returned to office. And I can't believe that you would throw your lot in with that person. But whatever. You're obviously stupid people and blind to reality, and that's just the way you're going to do that. I mean, I don't know whether I would even take some, well,
I can imagine, Trump, I need a meeting with Trump because I'm a little bit in trouble in my state and I need a little help from him. Yeah. And you walk in the office and Trump says to you, Senator Bolton.
Yeah.
Bolton? My name isn't Bolton. Well, right. I'm going to treat you like him. What's the difference? I can't tell you guys apart anyway. I don't have glasses. I can't see.
That's right. And I won't.
It's why I stumble down ramps.
Your name is. Right.
Do I know you? I don't know you.
All right. Well, I mean, they're putting their fate in his hands, and there's nothing about the way anything has worked to date that means that should drive them to the conclusion that this is going to work.
Loyalty.
Yeah, right. It says he values that, and all right. I don't know.
He's so loyal to Trump. He's got to be loyal to me.
I mean, there's no other play for some of them. Some of them are now so far behind and so obviously on their way out the door that they guess a last-ditch effort. Well, if we're going to cheat, then maybe they'll cheat and they'll help me out too. I guess I'll just become a Trump
Sessions, you all look alike to me. I can't tell.
All fired because they were the best.
Are the Republicans correct and they're on their glide path to winning? I don't think so. Here's G. Elliott Morris yesterday. Given Biden is up 8 nationally, the only way you can come out with a prediction for the election that doesn't have him favored by 80% or more at the time is to ignore polls or analyze them incorrectly. Maybe they'll be wrong, but they've been pretty accurate in the past and are a good bet. Again, for people who don't like polls, they're usually correct, right? Okay. And they were correct for the national vote last time, and state polls do have issues, which is what Political was talking about, but not this magnitude. And a lot of the polls have corrected for education, which is what they're talking about last time. And there's other things going on, including a pandemic and a trade war that didn't work out so well for Iowa, which is why it's in the mix, et cetera, et cetera. So G. Elliott Morris goes on to say, our forecast is maybe even a bit nice to Trump right now, given that the model thinks Biden will lose ground between now and November. We talked about that yesterday. That's not a guarantee. I think that's why he threw that in. And constrains the possible outcomes to a reasonable range for the polarized era. If we just use polls, his win percentage could be 90 plus. Polls in 2016 showed a modest polling error in Trump's favor could result in his winning the Electoral College. That's what happened. Now, polls show that you'd need a polling error bigger than those in 80 to 90% of past elections. Open up an R window, and he's talking about his program, and type in this code, and he gives you the code, and you'll have a simple prediction for how likely Biden is to beat the margin in the national vote he needs to win in the Electoral College. So again, it can go bigger, not just what it is right now. Somebody objects, that's my concern. The models don't account for rampant voter suppression. And G. Elliott Morris says, I'm getting tired of this objection. We have no empirical reason to believe the massive nationwide voter suppression. It's really only a concern in a few marginal states, if that. Means that all the polls and models are wrong. There's no data to back that up. Just like we have no evidence that hacking, Putin, etc. is what caused polls to miss in 2016. Or 2004, for that matter.
All right.
Because that's not what happened. Biden's polling ahead of where Clinton was in our forecast at this point in 2016 in literally every swing state. The point of our forecast is not to argue the polls are going to be right and X or Y is going to happen, but to tell you what happens if polls are wrong and how likely it is based on history and today's uncertainty. Today, that says Biden's an 87% bet. That could change. But that's where we are. And a huge amount of uncertainty isn't warranted by data or reasonable priors. So he's going with, you know what? I'm listening to you worry. I'm looking at the polls. I'll go with the polls.
I mean, I guess if you're a guy, but I don't know what else you could do if you're the data guy. You've declared yourself a data guy, and you're going to believe in the data.
There you go, Harry Anton. Declare yourself a science guy. You're going to believe in the science.
Right.
Why is one better than the other? We're lacking recent live interview polls, says Harry Anton, in the northern battlegrounds, but those that have come out in the past 3 weeks have shown Biden with a double-digit lead in Michigan, a 9-point edge in Wisconsin, and a 2-point lead in Ohio. All big league swings from 16.
Bigly. Yeah.
Right, exactly. All right, Amy Walter chimes in. These are all pretty smart cookies here in terms of analysts. Looking at Epic MRA and Michigan polling, January versus June, see how damaging Trump's mishandling of pandemic. Oh, John Harris should read this. See how damaging Trump mishandling of the pandemic has been on his standing. In January, Trump and Whitmer had similar job approvals, minus 12 for Trump and minus 7 for Whitmer. By June, Trump job approval is minus 23 and Whitmer's plus 17.
Really? Despite all the protests and everything?
Despite Harris's analysis that the pandemic isn't really hurting Trump.
Oh, well, that too. All right. I mean, well, that also speaks to what the size of those protests really were. And we were reminded all the time that they were going on, that this is like 15 people. They're just loud and have television cameras.
Right. And it's not all analysts who are sort of screwing this up. Here's Greg Sargent with a piece. New polls show Trump sinking under the seismic events of the moment. And here's E.J. Dionne. No, Trump can't defy the laws of gravity. But I think maybe the best way to put this in perspective is political scientist Dave Hopkins, who I often refer to. I love the name of his blog called Honest Graft, which is a quote from an American politics long gone. But this is honest graft.
Yes.
Yeah, you pay me and I get stuff done. The Promise and Puzzles of American Politics is the name of the blog. New states get the hype, but the electoral map hasn't changed.
Different states from before? Okay.
Well, now we're talking about Texas and we're talking about, Georgia. Basically, his point is the election's still going to come down to Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Florida.
So old states.
Right? So if Trump loses those states, he loses the election. And you can throw in some states that are obviously a big deal this time, like Arizona and North Carolina. But even if Biden wins them, is his argument, that doesn't change them into all of a sudden being blue states or Virginia or, something like that. And then if you add on the Georgia, Ohio, Texas, and Iowa, quad, again, those are very close states. Maybe Ohio is trending toward being a purple state again. It's moving in a Democratic direction, but all that does is restore Ohio and Iowa, for that matter, to their traditional swing state status.
I see. Okay.
Right? The new ones are Georgia and Texas, and they're probably not there yet.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the ones that we're going to come close but maybe not get. And to put it differently, if you had limited amounts of money, where would you be advertising? Well, Shane Goldmacher has a point to make about that. Joe Biden is making his first TV ad by the general election. It starts tomorrow. It's for 5 weeks, $15 million on TV, radio, digital, and print, including Spanish language in Florida and Arizona. But the states are Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Florida, and Arizona.
Well, you have to, or else if something goes wrong later on, they'll accuse you of not doing enough in those states.
Right. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Florida. And then you throw in North Carolina and Arizona as being gettable states. But it's still the big four plus two. And he's not spending in Georgia and Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have limited amounts of money, that's not where you put your resources right now.
I guess not.
So, where you put your money where your mouth is still a pretty good picture of how the Biden campaign is thinking about this. And, I guess my point about that is that, Hopkins is arguing the easiest, most accurate way to follow the election is still Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And he's not wrong. In fact, he's right. But it's enormously more fun to follow Arizona, Texas, Georgia, Iowa, and Ohio, as well as North Carolina.
Well, it certainly would be fun to see those things come out right. But
the interesting thing is, which do you think is an easier flip, North Carolina or Georgia?
North Carolina or Georgia, easier flip. Okay, yes. Right, North Carolina.
And it's not obvious. I mean, we've won North Carolina before. It's been a long time since we won Georgia. But Georgia has this Black Lives Matter thing going. and it's got
Yes.
cities.
That's true
And,
too.
and cities beget suburbs, and those are prime areas. And the Research Triangle in North Carolina doesn't quite make up for the density of population that you could hit in Georgia, in a
Yes.
place like Atlanta.
Right. True.
So which is more likely to flip? It's not clear.
All right. Yeah. That, I
Carolina has a
guess
better
makes it more
history
difficult.
recently of going Democrat, but there's a lot going on in Georgia. And so either one of those could be a flip, but it's not, it's not the big four. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And Michigan, frankly, that's the one of those four that looks like Biden's already won it.
Okay.
I mean, even if you do my usual mental calculation, you get an epic poll from Michigan and just divide by 2.
Okay.
If they say he's up by 16, well, he's probably up by 8.
All right. So you got to have a rule of thumb for these things. But all
That's
right.
that's what we call a win. In fact, it's a landslide.
Maybe this is all just about where have the reporters already booked hotel rooms, and the answer is Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and I guess you said Florida, and those have to be the hot spots.
Yeah, I don't
because
believe
that's
there was
where I'm
a
going.
poll out from Tip that said that Florida was up 10 points for Biden. I don't believe that, but he could win Florida. It's possible. There's a lot of old people and they're not really happy about what Trump is doing. As a matter of fact, Trump is tweeting this morning, "You can't vote for Biden. He screwed up swine flu."
Yeah. Well, there goes the swine vote.
Really? Are you making the case that this is just ordinary flu? Are you saying that we should compare how many people died in each circumstance?
All right, let's.
Are you talking about the fact that there was actually a government response which helped to minimize that? What are you talking about here? It's hard to know.
I'm talking about nothing.
I have to ask John Harris. Harris is my Trump whisperer, so he'll interpret how this is all good for Trump.
I don't know.
That's
doesn't make any
replaced
sense.
the
It
whole,
won't.
all good for John McCain stuff. Like, no matter how bad it
yeah.
is, it's good for Trump because reasons which are not obviously available to the rest of us to see.
He has screamed it, so that's the reason it's important.
So again, the election's going to come down to only a handful of states, maybe 10, and 4 of them are the most important. And here's another one. Everybody says it's 4.5 months away. What if this is all settled by September 1st? What if in everybody's mind by September 1st, they know exactly what they're going to do because there aren't any undecideds?
Yeah, nothing. I mean, nothing happens. We can't just
That's in
ask
10 weeks.
unanimous consent to have the election earlier.
What's going to happen in 10 weeks
happens
that's
when
going
it
to change
happens.
everybody's mind?
And
don't forget, we start voting.
But we still have to wait.
Illinois, I think, some of the states they start to vote 45 days before the election. That's when the early vote starts.
That's nice.
So we're not just talking about theoretically, you don't change your mind. Obviously, there's a lot of mind-changing people. That's how Trump won.
Yeah.
Comey pushed the late deciders and won them bigly, just like he won bigly the people who hated everybody. But, big differences in 2016. There aren't that many undecideds, and the third party just isn't as big.
Yeah. Well,
That's why Biden's hitting 50.
Well, I hope that those ad buys are not just limited to either attacks on Trump or biographical information or whatever, but are specifically get out and vote early and don't wait.
And that's where people should spend money. And there are resources that are being put into mail-in votes and the things that matter. And here's another point to be made. I don't know if if you watch cable TV at all, you'll see the occasional Trump ad come on, and the one they're playing right now and sinking millions of dollars into is the one that says Biden is weak on China. So Bolton comes out with this book that said that Trump was begging the president of China to win the election for him in exchange for soybean sales.
All right.
Or something.
Yeah.
So that whole $1 million campaign to paint Biden as weak on China when Trump is a supplicant is, you just burned all that money and got nothing.
Yeah. I mean, if people believe it, I guess I don't know. I'm not certain what the outcome of having John Bolton's book out there is, but I guess we'll find out shortly. They'll be asking people.
Does spending money on ads like that on cable TV work at all? I mean, we already decided a couple elections ago that a lot of these ad people, they make a lot of money, but it's not clear they're really helping anybody.
That's true. We never really did find out about that. And last election told us that you were better off, or you could get better results by flooding social media, Facebook, with ads. And I mean, I imagine that's still to come here.
No, it's not still to come. They've been doing that.
Yes.
See, that's the point. They've been doing that for a year and a half. And look at the numbers.
I imagine that there'll still be a barrage of something new on the way, whether or not it's effective this time.
Well, that's the point about being effective. They've already been doing it, and the only thing that's happening is Biden's lead is widening. So why is this all of a sudden going to work in the last month?
I don't know. Well, then what's the difference about whether we vote early or just all wait till November?
Well, once you vote early, you can't change your mind again.
Yeah, but what minds are changing if none of the advertising is working?
I don't think it matters. I'm just saying if people are saying, well, it's 4.5 months, 5 months away, it's not really 5 months away. When you start voting, that's when you start counting.
Well, we should have everybody make sure that they cast their vote. I mean, that should be a part of the
It gets late early in these parts.
And just say, well, what are you waiting for? Don't you want to vote against him as soon as possible? Just go do it. You know you're not changing your mind. Go. And that should be the drive for everybody, and bank those votes, and then it won't matter what the October surprise is. Oh, my God, you convinced me with the October surprise, but damn, I already voted.
As we used to say back in the 60s, vote for the Kennedy of your choice, but vote.
Guess so. All right, well, they should be passing out those, they are passing out in many cases the applications. That's what's got Trump declaring them to be fraud.
Well, Wisconsin said they're going to do it. They had a board of 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats and said, no, we're going to go ahead and send everybody applications. It's a good idea.
Oh, okay, good. Well, that's nice. Some people on the board must have known somebody who got COVID.
Right. Anyway, so that's all I got for you today. Sorry.
Okay. Well, that's not enough. You're going to have to stay and do the rest.
Well, I have to come back on Monday, I guess.
Okay, all right. Well, we can wait. We'll
have to do my
wait.
remedial show on Monday for all the stuff I missed.
I guess so. Yeah, we should just say vote early, and we'll have our Monday show tomorrow, and get it over with, and then that way no one can change their mind over the weekend. Something? Is this the way we can work this out? Okay. All right. That's it, I guess. All we know about the John Bolton book is what this is the interesting part. Is a 500-page book. No one has read this yet. I mean, they keep.
No, Peter Baker has. Some of these guys got advanced copies.
And why did they wait? I always found that kind of fascinating. But anyway, all right, I guess you have an embargo date or something. So they claim to have read all 500 pages of these things, because it is interesting that I saw Marcy Wheeler ask a poignant question. It's odd that everybody has the same stories from the book. Is there 480 pages of nothing and 20 pages of the same awesome that all the people who read the book
one person
really
reviewing it said yes. Oh. Actually, the writing is tedious and pedantic, except for the part where it's self-aggrandizing, so you get to pick between the two.
Okay.
But here are the good parts.
I guess so, because there's also the possibility that, look, the press release came out and told you you don't want to read the 500 pages. Here's some great juicy stuff, stories we would like to see published in the papers, and then everybody says, "Oh, I read the book, and this is the brilliant part." And I expect that that's probably true, though. You're right. I mean, if you waste your time on the 500 pages, I think you will be sorry.
But the more important point is don't buy it.
Yeah.
Right. Just read the excerpts.
I don't buy any.
Don't give them the money.
Yeah. And they're available to you, the excerpts, and it may even be that normally you say, I want to read the thing for myself to be sure that either nothing has been missed or misinterpreted, but I can't imagine reading 500 pages of Bolton's writings to figure that out.
I think that the pandemic and the economic data, which is still not good, and the Black Lives Matter backlash, which again is amazing in terms of how people have changed their minds. We're starting to win now on the idea about renaming Confederate bases and those statues going down, for example, if you want to look and see how it's affecting the culture, which in turn will affect votes. Those are important things. Bolton's book isn't important, but I will say this: the more time people spend on it, whether it's talking about it or trying to analyze it, whatever, is another day that Trump has to backpedal, apologize, explain it. It just takes another day away from his purported November comeback, and he's running out of time. So in that sense, I don't mind it.
Okay. Well, then that's the most you can get out of it. Is that there's a sense in which Greg doesn't mind everybody.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
so
Talk
go
about
ahead.
Bolton's book and about how he thinks Trump is a jerk. It's okay with me.
Yeah.
Total permission to do that.
Right. And you don't have to even come
But it's
away
distracting
thinking
from the important
Bolton's
things.
a good guy.
No, actually, it's not, because people are paying attention to the important things.
Yeah. Well, right. And I mean, arguably, the things that he had to say in the book that he accuses Trump of having done are important violations, and
But they're known
of
important
America's
things that
trust.
we already
That's
know
true.
the Republicans aren't going to do anything about. So it's
No.
up to you, the voter, to do something
Right.
about it.
Well, you can. Well, and in a few weeks, fewer than you think, you can have your moment and do that thing about it that you intended to do.
You know, it's also worth revisiting your thoughts about impeachment.
Mine.
Remember, and well, just you writ large.
Oh, okay.
Why did people want him impeached? Remember the whole argument? It's not the time. Timing is everything. What's the point of impeaching him if he's only going to be acquitted?
Yeah.
Well, that'll make him stronger. No, it's not going to make him stronger. It's just, how is it going to help? What's your goal?
Okay.
If your goal is to remove him, that's not going to happen. Why? Right. Because there's a Republican Senate.
Yes.
People said that even before impeachment got off the ground, and they were right.
That is true.
Okay? But other people said, well, but it's not only the right thing to do. We're talking politics. What's the right thing got to do with it? Well, you also have to establish a marker about what is right, so that even if he's not removed, then when you go to reelect him or not reelect him, you understand what he did. And that's important. And perhaps it'll be, as Susan Collins said, a restraint. Well, that didn't turn out to be true, but knowing what he did is important, so that part of it was true. And that being the case, you know, would you do it again? And if you did it again, would you do it Bolton's way, which is to expand the universe of things you charge him on? We'd still be talking about it. We haven't even brought it up yet because there's so many things. Mm-hmm. Or do you hone down and try to do a few things? You know, there's no right or wrong strategy. But what I'm saying is that it's playing out pretty much how people thought it would.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, I guess in terms of your, you've all guessed correctly.
Nobody was wrong. Everybody was right. It's just that you're going to have to vote him out.
Yeah. All right. Well, like you said, fewer weeks between now and then than you might have thought. And get your ballot and do it early. And then rest, I guess.
Abby and I will see you on Monday.
Okay, very good. We'll hear from you both soon enough. Have a great weekend. Relax, stay healthy, and wait for more excerpts from the book and see if they're any good, I guess. Don't read it. Don't buy it. You're right. Okay, thanks, Greg. See you then. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Uh-oh, what's happening here? I've got something happening that Greg is texting me about through back channels of Skype. I got a wow. And then, all right, let's go find out, because it says, wow, full Nazi. So I guess I better check out what is behind this tweet. Ah, yes, I did see something about this last night, and I had some difficulty untangling exactly what was going on here. But let's see. It's got a wow from Greg, so this explanation will perhaps help. I saw a lot of people trying to make the point, and they weren't illustrating it clearly enough for me in tweet form, and it was also like 1 a.m. So maybe they were doing a great job, and I just didn't know it. Matea Gold, though, tweeting this, and she's, of course, is she an investigative reporter that she's, I edit political enterprise stories and investigations. There we are, for the Washington Post, she tells us. Trump campaign runs ads with marking once used by Nazis to designate political prisoners. Here's Isaac Stanley Becker is reporting, and I'm a little disturbed by this one, not in the way that I'm supposed to be, because there's Nazi-related imagery, but because I already see the outcome of this argument being, hey, what the hell are you talking about? We didn't know, or it's a surveyor's mark kind of a thing. All right, but anyway, here's, should we just go to the Washington Post write-up of it and see if this makes some sense to us here? Because I tried explaining it aloud to myself at 1 a.m, and it didn't click for me. Trump campaign runs ads with marking once used by Nazis to designate political prisoners. The trouble here, you've seen it, right? I'm not breaking news, I don't think, for anybody. Maybe you've seen it on Twitter this morning. The trouble is that the marking once used by Nazis to designate political prisoners that they're talking about is a red triangle. And who knows what the hell they're trying to do with that. It doesn't click for most people, quite honestly. I'm not trying to excuse what they're doing here or anything. And it may very well be that they are such weirdo Nazi, what would you call them? Like fanboys, essentially, that they did do this on purpose. But I think the on purpose part may have included the premeditated excuse of when are you talking about, and who even knows without having to go to Wikipedia at the urging of World War II nerds to go and find out what the red triangle was used for in Nazi concentration camps. But all right, let's read the thoughts here. Isaac Stanley Becker. I don't mean to downplay this. I mean, but I'm and it's not that I'm not convinced that they could have done this and done it knowingly and on purpose. This is, and I hate to rely on this, but your politically savvy commentators would probably ask you, what's the upshot of this? So what impact will it have on the voters? And I'm worried that they might be right about this one. All right, well, let's see what Isaac Stanley Becker, who's making a correct point, presumably, has to say about this. In its online salvo against Antifa and far-left mobs, those in quotes, quote, far-left mobs, right? President Trump's re-election campaign is displaying a marking once used by the Nazis to designate political prisoners in concentration camps. The red inverted triangle, that's, it's a triangle, and there's no rules about how triangles should be displayed, I don't think. But in other words, it looks like a downward pointing arrowhead or triangle. The red inverted triangle was first used in the 1930s to identify communists and was applied as well to social democrats, liberals, Freemasons, and other members of opposition parties, which, by the way, there's a tremendous parallel for you right there, right? You know, in the 1950s, we learned to hate communists because something bad, communism, ironically Russia, etc. And now these days, of course, political conservatives just label anyone who is a political opponent essentially a communist. You're a communist, socialist, what have you. You voted for, something mild and universally recognized elsewhere as decent. You are therefore a communist. Eventually, they'll get around to calling you a communist. The same thing with the Nazis, and now it used to be the case that then everyone would accuse you of violating Godwin's law, but now we all realize that they were right all along. All right. Anyhow, the badge, the triangle, forced on Jewish political prisoners, by contrast, featured a red inverted triangle superimposed on a yellow triangle, not inverted one. And of course, guess what? The two triangles may cut together. See, it's not a Jewish, an anti-Semitic thing. It's triangles. That's all. Surveyor's marks. A spokesman for the Trump campaign did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Okay, obligatory. They have to say that. The symbol appeared in Facebook ads run by Trump and Vice President Pence, as well as the, quote, Team Trump account on Facebook, whatever that might be. Who knows? No one. Does anybody even know who owns it? I don't know. Maybe they do, and they explain it later in the story. Plausible deniability? I don't know. Again, Facebook ads, just as Greg and I were going back and forth earlier. Well, aren't they going to do this again on Facebook? Well, they've already been doing it, yes. And nobody noticed, or everybody noticed, or it has no effect, or it's the worst thing in the world. I don't know what to make of the Facebook advertising, just that it angers me. But what it's supposed to, apparently. The symbol appeared in Facebook ads run by Trump and Vice President Pence, as well as Team Trump's account on Facebook. It was featured alongside text warning of danger, and this is a quote. The quote begins, dangerous, all capitals, mobs of far-left groups, unquote, and asking users to sign a petition about Antifa, which I see everybody is now getting into the habit of erasing the capitalization of, because it's just not really a proper organization or group of any kind, and so it doesn't make any sense. But dangerous mobs of far-left groups asking users to sign a petition about Antifa, a loose collection of anti-fascist activists with whom the Trump administration has sought to tie to recent violence. Not with whom, but whom the Trump administration has sought to tie to recent violence in spite of arrest records showing their involvement is trivial. And I would add here, in spite of arrest records showing that the violence for which people are being arrested is in fact being perpetrated by fascist sympathizers and right-wing lunatics and boogaloo boys and some of our own stray military folks, which is pretty amazing. We can get to that story next and maybe return to the whole issue of integration and infiltration of the police and military by those people, which we started yesterday. Other variations of the ads use a yield sign, which has the same shape and a similar color scheme, but is notably distinct in only featuring a red outline and a white interior, if you haven't seen a yield sign lately. Some of the material also features a stop sign. So it seems to me like it's designed. The campaign is designed not only to evoke for some observers this Nazi imagery, but also to confuse the picture and say, we're just experimenting with different shapes. That's what Facebook advertising is all about. You wouldn't be surprised at some point to start seeing them running ads with swastikas in there, and then the same ad inexplicably with a pound sign, hashtag sign instead, and then one with some tic-tac-toe filled in, and then say, what are you talking about, swastika? Some early versions of it ran with a swastika, but we were just testing different imagery. We didn't mean it in that sense. We meant it in the ancient Indian symbol of good luck, you see, and plus also it's a surveyor's mark. I mean, I think we've been down this road before. All right, we'll continue on with this article, though. I think it's a highly problematic use of a symbol that Nazis used to identify their political enemies, said Jacob S. Eder, E-D-E-R, a historian of modern Germany at the, do you care where? He's in Berlin. The Baron Boehm Said Academy. It's in Berlin. It's an academy. It's spelled with a K, A-K-A-D-E-M-I-E, because it's German. That's supposed to mean something to us. He's a very serious scholar, and I'm sure he is. It's hard to imagine it's done on purpose, see, already, because I'm not sure if the vast majority of Americans know or understand the sign, but it's very, very careless, to say the least. You know what? I don't know what to tell you. This is falling apart as I'm reading it. Quite honestly, I don't see it happening. And it's not that I don't think it's done. I think it is done on purpose because the vast majority of Americans don't know or understand the sign. But then we'll have it explained to us by people who are students of these things. And I don't know. Maybe I'm doing their work for them by casting doubt on it. I have no doubt that the people who did it are Nazi sympathizing a-holes and deserve the worst kind of defeat and death. Both. But I don't know. We're not supposed to spend, I don't think we should spend that much more time, quite honestly, trying to dissect it. Maybe they used Nazi imagery. Maybe they didn't. I'm perfectly willing to believe that they did, and they did it on purpose, and they're hoping that we'll spend time debating it, and we shouldn't. Is there more to this? I guess we should. I'm somewhat interested in the mechanics of their advertising scheme. So we'll skip down to some of that. This isn't just one post this group wrote on Twitter. The group is Bend the Arc, Jewish Action, a progressive advocacy group, which condemned this whole thing. This isn't just one post. This is dozens of carefully targeted ads from official pages of Mike Pence, Donald Trump, Team Trump, all paid for by Trump and the Republican National Committee, all spreading lies and genocidal imagery. Bad, right? True, it is. Some of the ads featuring the inverted red triangle, which began running on Wednesday, were still active on Trump's pages on Thursday morning. They had gained as many as 950,000 impressions from the president's Facebook account alone. Trump has made Antifa a label associated with anti-fascist protesters who infamously sparred with far-right figures after his election in 2016, made this Antifa a centerpiece of his response to recent demonstrations over the killing of George Floyd. The effort to rally his supporters using the specter of a marauding horde resembles the emphasis he placed on the threat of a migrant caravan heading to the U.S. border in the lead-up to the midterm elections in 2018. There are some parallels there. I think a lot of people do see it. Now they have ghost caravans of Antifa heading to the small burgs of the U.S. To wreak havoc, and we have citizens on patrol against these ghost caravans walking the parking lots of their Walmarts with their AR-15s, and I don't know. There you have it. I'm gonna jump off of this. I understand the concern with it. Isaac is almost certainly right. Jacob in Berlin is almost certainly right, and I don't know what to tell you. This is supposed to be a brush fire to avert our gaze for a little while, and they're terrible people. I didn't need any more proof of it. I believe it when they say that it's Nazi imagery. I believe it when they say it was done on purpose. Now what? Okay, I'll tell you what now. My attention is being redirected to breaking news by both Brian Monroe and Kate Sherrill, pointing, I think, to the same thing. Let's open it up. Brian sent us to Supreme Court blocks President Trump from ending DACA. That news, and I think Kate is pointing us to the same thing here. Breaking: Roberts joins court's liberals to overturn Trump decision to rescind DACA. This one leading us to the Supreme Court and their written ruling rather than a brief summary of it. And you know how it will go on the radio show. We want to read you the full ruling from the Supreme Court, but it's 74 pages. We'll settle for now for ABC News' report on this one. Actually, it comes from the AP. Astrid Galvin, being reproduced here on the local ABC affiliate. What's the news? Supreme Court on Thursday, today, right now, it's breaking, rejected President Donald Trump's effort to end legal protections for 650,000 young immigrants, a stunning rebuke to the president in the midst of his re-election campaign. The outcome seems certain to elevate the issue in Trump's campaign, which I'm not entirely convinced he thinks is a terrible thing, given that the anti-immigrant rhetoric of his first presidential run in 2016 and immigration restrictions his administration has imposed since then. So I guess what this sets up as, it sets up for Trump and his campaign team a fight to say, see, the liberals are still trying to let too many immigrants in this country. I'm fighting so hard and so effectively to prevent that, but the liberal courts who need to be abolished or fixed or replaced or what have you, return us to office and we'll replace everybody on the Supreme Court who voted against us, yada, yada, something, something, an impossible promise to make to people. Not unlike what's been going on with abortion for decades. As it turns out, why don't you just-ism isn't really a governing philosophy, but it is a great campaign philosophy. People always are willing to turn out for people who will state things plainly and say, I will do X, Y, Z, even though they know very well that they can't. And then, of course, if you have an excuse in your pocket as to why none of the things you said you were going to do have come to pass, and the excuse is, well, the deep state is preventing me, but I'm also going to promise you about that I will root out and defeat the deep state. Well, but you haven't in 4 years. I know they're so tough because of the deep state. In fact, there's a deep state that's preventing me from fighting the deep state, and you got to elect me to get rid of that one too. And for some reason this works, and then teenagers camp out for a week in advance of your rally and play guitar on viral videos and sing your praises, literally. So it appears to work for him, and we'll be seeing more of the same. We'll see what happens if he's actually defeated and whether or not he leaves the White House. If he is, I understand that the other day that they actually got him to say, I don't know what he thought he was going to gain by doing so, but I think he did comment on it. Yeah, I'll leave peacefully, which of course is, we shouldn't really, that should go without saying, but it doesn't in this country. All right, let's see. One other tidbit I want to throw in there before moving on to the weirdos who are trying to spark their second civil war. Another item that I guess is supposed to distract our attention from something, I don't know what. Trump wants to find and prosecute whoever told the media about his bunker visit, according to the New York Times. I happen to be reading this, though, from The Hill, who is telling us what the New York Times is saying. And in all likelihood, it is something they buried in a very large and expansive article that would take the rest of the show to read. I gather that this is the case because Maggie Haberman has written it. And so The Hill, to the extent they're valuable for anything, they will excerpt something from a very long and ponderous Maggie Haberman piece and tell you what you really need to know. So let's use them for that purpose. President Trump demanded officials find and prosecute people responsible for leaking information about his visit to a bunker beneath the White House amid protests, the New York Times reported. Trump's comments regarding the leak about the bunker came as the president had complained to advisors that no matter what he does, he cannot get good stories from the press, the Times reported. I mean, yeah, well, he can't because he sucks and he does only stupid things and whatever. We all know this. He also complained that nothing he does is good enough amid criticism over his handling of the death of George Floyd. According to the report, Floyd's death in Minneapolis, well, okay, you know all about that. I don't mean to belittle it, but let's stick to the subject here for just a moment. The Hill reached out to the White House regarding Trump's reported comments. Probably nothing happened. Earlier this month, Trump denied reports that he was rushed to an underground bunker as protests grew violent. He told Fox News' Brian Kilmeade during a radio interview that he had gone to the bunker to inspect it during the day and not during the protests at night. Attorney General William Barr, however, later undercut Trump's claims and seemingly confirmed reports that Trump was rushed to the bunker on the evening of Friday, May 29th, as protests near the White House intensified. Barr said the U.S. Secret Service recommended that the president be moved to the bunker. Trump has been criticized over his handling of Floyd's death and subsequent protests. Protesters were forcibly cleared from Lafayette Square amid demonstrations earlier this month as Trump walked from the White House to St. John's Episcopal Church to take a photo holding a Bible alongside his staff members. The church had been vandalized the night before. All true background information. We already knew all about that. By the way, I have seen circulating on Twitter a bumper sticker somebody made up. I should probably give myself a note to go find that thing. Why did the chicken cross the road? And the answer is to get a photo op at the church or something like that. So I thought that was pretty well done. And it, by definition, fits on a bumper sticker, so you know it's going to work. Okay, moving on then to another subject I told you we were going to touch on. The continuing problem of wackos moving freely in between right-wing terrorist organizations, and they really are terrorist organizations, and the police and or the military. Here's a piece from Stars and Stripes, which would ordinarily, you think, have an interest in suppressing such stories if they weren't true, but I gather their dedication to truth and journalism outweighed their instinct to want to protect the reputations of the active members of the military and root out bad apples, so good for them. Grand jury indicts Army reservist, Navy vet, and Air Force vet. I guess they're not active duty, so that's good news. And maybe that's part of the reason they were so interested in printing this. They were indicted, why? On terror charges over Las Vegas protest plot. Here's the news as reported by Ricardo Torres Cortez of the Las Vegas Sun, and they're run in Stars and Stripes. They're always fooling me, these aggregators. These three self-proclaimed Boogaloo members, there's that term again, accused of conspiring to exploit a George Floyd protest in Las Vegas for mayhem, have been formally charged by a federal grand jury. If convicted, they each face up to 30 years in prison and $500,000 in fines. Stephen Kiwi Parshall, that's the nickname, Kiwi for some reason, 35, Andrew Lyman, 23, and William Loomis, age 40, were indicted on counts of conspiracy to damage and destroy by fire an explosive and possession of unregistered firearms, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Nevada announced on Wednesday. Chief District Judge Linda Bell set a $1 million bail for the three men and high-level electronic monitoring if they post bail. They are due in court again on July 16th. Parshall's lawyer, Robert Draskovich, called the evidence insufficient and said his client is looking forward to having his day in court. Whatever. Loomis's lawyer, Richard Wright, declined to comment. A message seeking comment from Lynham's lawyer in the county case, Ryan Helmick, was not immediately returned. His lawyer was in federal court. Sylvia Irvin argued earlier this week that investigators had relied heavily on a confidential informant whose trustworthiness is unknown in order to make the allegations. Okay, so the decentralized extremist right-wing Boogaloo movement yearns to spark a second civil war in the U.S. On Wednesday, federal authorities in California charged two men, including an Air Force sergeant, with murder in the slaying of a Bay Area federal security officer, we mentioned this yesterday, guarding a courthouse during a Floyd demonstration. Staff Sergeant Stephen Carrillo and Robert Alvin Justus Jr., Justus, were separately charged with murder and attempted murder counts in the shooting of two officers who were trying to take Carrillo into custody, the New York Times reported. So not only shot the federal guard at the courthouse in Oakland, but later, I think elsewhere in California, shot two officers who were trying to arrest him. He's resisting. That's actual resisting, everybody. But he made it. He's in jail. He didn't even get shot at all. Separately, on Thursday, a federal grand jury in Texas indicted another enthusiast of the Boogaloo movement, Aaron Swenson, who was arrested in April as he wore a ballistic vest and had two loaded guns and a shotgun in his car, according to the Associated Press. Of course, that's just one gun shy, by the way, of what Chris Kobach just recently had stolen from his car. Did everybody happen to catch that news? I don't think we got to talk about that, but I'll find you the story on that one. I don't think I even put that one aside, but I think Scott Charles told me about that one, by way of monitoring those who have guns stolen from their cars. Chris Kobach now among that group, and I think a valid question at some point posed by Hunter, what was he doing with all those guns in his car anyway? And usually we sort of investigate that sort of thing and try and find out why somebody who lost control of 4 guns from their car was driving anywhere with that many weapons. But okay, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the frequency with which we are now arresting and indicting Boogaloo boys. This last one was down in Texas. We've got California arrests, Las Vegas arrests, Texas arrests. Very odd. Arrested he was, that sounds like Yoda. Arrested he was in April as he wore the ballistic vest, 2 loaded guns, and a shotgun in his car, according to the AP. Authorities allege he'd taken to a stream on Facebook to threaten to kill a cop. Good on you, Facebook. You guys are attracting all the real winners here. And also the president's reelection campaign is banking on you, too. That's weird. The Las Vegas suspects, who have ties to the U.S. military, were taken into custody a few miles from a Floyd protest on May 30th. Demonstrators across the U.S. hit the streets in daily protest, you know why. And anger about racism and police brutality simmering. Some protests have gone from peaceful to heated to rioting, though it's questionable about how that progression happened. Ideal conditions for groups with Boogaloo ideology to sow discord, and by a lot of available evidence, that's just what they were doing. The suspects first met on Facebook. Who would have believed it? And then in person, following the COVID-19 related lockdowns, according to court documents. That's interesting. They went to reopen Nevada protests and then on hikes, which would serve for recruitment. They seemingly conducted background checks on an unknown number of potential recruits. I just wanted to stop on that part and compare that to something that Greg and I were talking about the other day, where he was saying that the pandemic lockdowns and the growth of the protest movement over the George Floyd murder seem to have fed on one another, and with in various ways, in a very weird and complex, understandable but complex dynamic. And as it turns out, one, that wasn't the only group among which it had that impact. Here we see the fact of the lockdown and the relief from the lockdown that people found in anti-lockdown protests and outdoor activities like hiking, which were supposed to be harmless ways to spend your time outside of the house, right, have led to that same weird dynamic in the opposite end of the spectrum among the Boogaloo Boys, although then they decided that they were going to use the chaos of the protests to create even more chaos. It's an odd thing this thing has done to us, isn't it? Not that President Trump was ever right about it. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As we cut out, I realized I needed more time to kind of explain this thing about... I shouldn't have to explain to anybody why I would say something like, well, President Trump was never right about the lockdown. What I was going to say was... and this is the sort of thing that maybe I shouldn't even say it. Now, Politico will write an article saying that President Trump had a point about the lockdown. Remember when Trump was arguing against lockdown and social distancing through our isolation, our self-isolation at home, because it would lead to more deaths than COVID itself. And wouldn't that really be the deadly problem? And he sort of tried to explain himself by saying, well, it's going to depress people and they'll all commit suicide or something. Or as other people, perhaps more credibly, in a way, argued, this home confinement could lead to an exacerbation of domestic violence problems. And it makes some sense. But then they tried to sort of like guilt people into, it was like concern trolling about domestic violence. You people don't actually care about preventing or helping the victims of domestic violence. You just know that that's something that motivates feelings of sympathy and worry among liberals who, care about such things, and you're trying to weaponize our interest in reducing domestic violence in service of your point about, opposing the lockdown. And that's what we used to just call concern trolling. And, it's true and it works. And by the way, that concern trolling is at the heart of understanding that you can concern troll people, as I think has been at the heart of the propaganda that we, have spent the last couple of years suspecting that the Russians were behind. They are able to figure this stuff out, and they were able to, it's not hard. You can see where the divisions and fissure lines are and fault lines among the American electorate, and they seek to exploit those things. That's why, in addition to running obvious and open pro-Trump propaganda, they also tried to disguise themselves, even in 2016, as Black Lives Matter activists and rally people to their to what ended up being a fake cause, but they knew that they could get people to be they could use the energy of the legitimate Black Lives Matter movement to fool people into following their lead, and that they could leave behind breadcrumbs like Facebook pages called Black Lives or Black Live Matter or Black Lives Matters is or whatever, or they could misspell things or add a state name to it, and people would unfortunately stumble upon it and believe that it was the genuine article, and then they would build up a following and then start posting calls for open violence against, targeted violence against police, and then say anybody associated with or visiting that page was therefore some sort of dangerous anarchist, and they could point their right-wing groups to it, and they could circulate imagery taken from it and say, see, we were right about that. We really were correct. And I guess that leads us eventually to people believing that every Egg McMuffin is going to be poisoned because look what they're saying on Facebook. Facebook seems to be at the center of a lot of this stuff. Very odd. Anyway, so no real point here for President Trump, although I imagine if you tried to discuss this with him, he would point to this thing and say, yeah, see, because they were all locked down, that's why they pushed back against it. They went to reopen Nevada protests. That's how they met. Then they went hiking to keep themselves busy during this lockdown, which was totally unnecessary because it's just like the flu, blah, blah, blah. And while they were out there trying to not be locked down, they cooked up this plot, and it never would have happened if it wasn't for the lockdown. That's the sort of thing that they would try to claim has some validity. It has none. Okay. So what did they decide to do? Apparently, they spoke together about firebombing a post at Lake Mead National Recreation Area. What? Okay. And a utilities facility in Las Vegas, documents show. But then the video of Floyd under an officer's knee as he pleaded for his life hit the airwaves. So they had this plan even before the protests were going on. So I don't even know what relation it really does bear to those things. But, this is I don't know what to tell you. This is the extent of their big plan, was they were going to firebomb a post at Lake Mead National Recreation Area. That really would have set off a second Civil War. Maybe they don't have a case. Maybe prosecutors are overstating it at this point. I have no idea what to make of this. But people do tend to hatch plots to firebomb stuff that's close to them. They don't want to go out of their way or exert themselves to do their firebombing. And maybe that's the only thing standing between us and a second Civil War is these guys appear to be pretty lazy. I guess we should be glad about that, but one day somebody isn't going to be lazy, and we don't want to let your guard down. So anyway, apparently they didn't know that they had also been infiltrated by the FBI, so that's probably also bad for your planning. The suspects then changed strategy once the protests began. In a Floyd-inspired protest, Lyman taunted police, because everyone was taunting police, and he thought he could do it from a different angle and get away with it. And Parshall tried to spark anger in the crowd by telling protesters that peace wasn't the winning formula, documents show. The following day, the three were arrested about 2 miles from a protest in downtown Las Vegas. They were caught with firearms and materials to make Molotov cocktails, not Mazel Tov, but Molotov cocktails, which they hoped to launch at officers if the protest turned unruly, authorities allege. And I guess if it's all to be believed, once again, just more evidence that no, it wasn't the legitimate protesters who actually had a serious issue to protest who were out there, but rather people who sought to take advantage of it. And by the way, I haven't mentioned it yet, but who are white. And they're the ones who've been caught with the Molotov cocktails. They're the ones who had plans to blow things up, the ones who showed up to taunt police and try to goad the crowd to anger. But President Trump is advertising on Facebook complete with red triangles, apparently, that it's really everybody else. And I just thought maybe we should lay these two cases out side by side so that, I don't know, you could speak to somebody over the weekend if you find yourself less than socially distanced, who might find themselves believing that the unruly mobs of protesters were the ones who were degenerating into violence and looting, when it seems pretty clear from arrests around the country that that's not the case. Not that that will convince any Trumpsters, because all the arrests were made by the FBI, and we know how terrible they are, or something like that. So there they go. They got themselves arrested and indicted. I think that's basically the end of the article. We'll move on from there. Back to Pocket. See what else we have parked here to share with you. And there's been let's see, I got to open up some of these oddball tweets to see what they are. Ah, yes, here we are. Let's read these. This has got something to do with social media and its manipulation during the campaigns. I thought this was interesting. You all know the campaign and Twitter account associated with it of Sleeping Giants. Have you run into that one? If you haven't, I don't know where you've been, but Sleeping Giants has been a very interesting and essential movement to target the advertisers who underwrite the platforms that the far-right, alt-right, and Breitbart types, etc., use to spread their propaganda and to, essentially to, I think it's fair to say, shame the corporate sponsors out of continuing their sponsorship of this garbage. It's, maybe the only weapon available to us that you can use, and it's been pretty effective as well. But Sleeping Giants tweeted this thing out the other day saying, this thread is bananas. It's the first time we've heard about this, and it has been well over 3 years. Let's find out what this is. It's astounding how entangled in politics the simple serving of ads is. It seems that terms of service are only applied at Google and Facebook when politically convenient, which I think a lot of people have suspected. What's this bananas thread he's talking about? It comes from William Fitzgerald, who, let's take a look at this thing and then flip back to the rest of what Sleeping Giants was saying about it. William Fitzgerald, who you'll find under William_Fitz, runs campaigns at The Worker Agency, with which I am unfamiliar, but this is the story he's telling. Remember the first time I mass organized with coworkers at Google? Okay, so a former Google employee. And he's not asking you whether you remember it. He's saying, I remember, I guess, the first time I mass organized with coworkers at Google. I saw Sleeping Giants screenshot ads from Breitbart and saw they were all served by Google. So here he is working at Google at the time, and he sees the campaign undertaken by Sleeping Giants. And this is what Sleeping Giants themselves were never aware of until this point, that there was a group organizing inside Google of Google employees saying, hey, this is wrong. This violates our terms of service. We should do something about this. He says, William does, I reached out to some folks on internal mailing lists inside Google who I saw were also angry that Google was serving ads on Breitbart. And let's see, he's telling this story. He's reminded of the story because of a NBC News tweet, the NBC News Verification Center account that tweets the story that broke, I guess, over the weekend. Two far-right sites, Zero Hedge and The Federalist, will no longer be able to generate revenue from any advertisements served by Google Ads. A.M. Fraser NBC reports. And as it turns out, I think they've even backed off of that report and decided that what was really happening was that Google was telling The Federalist and Zero Hedge that they were in danger of being booted out of the Google Ads serving program, but that they hadn't actually been booted out. This was a minor dust-up over the weekend, but lots of people wondering about who funds The Federalist got part of their answer. Allegedly, Google wanted out from partially funding The Federalist with their ad service. Anyway, William continues here and says, there were 4 of us at the start, and he talks about some of who those folks were. We found countless examples of policy violations on the site, If a site was found to violate the policy, the company policy was to turn off ads on the site. So, right, black and white here. They got it. There you got them dead to rights. We wrote up an open letter to Sundar asking him to stop serving ads on Breitbart. Nearly 3,000 workers signed it. At the time, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was the largest mass sign-on letter ever at Google. And he says this was before Maven, which means nothing to me, but probably does to others. Also, we learned a whole lot about how to make an open letter successful, the language that worked, distributing to formal and informal networks, responding to the reply guys, etc. This all proved helpful for later campaigns both at Google and other companies. The letter itself put management in a bind. How to not piss off Steve Bannon, who they were worried would send the Federal Trade Commission after them, but also what to do about the 3,000 workers who read the ad policy, and could see clearly that Breitbart clearly violated it all the time. After weeks of non-answers from management, we were told they'd stop serving ads on specific pages of the site. The ad policy team asked us to send them links, and he puts the the eye roll emoji here. A few of us spent the next weeks and months sending them links, and in response, they disable ads on those specific pages. So, interesting response from Google. They don't want to lose the revenue, but they don't want to violate their policy. They don't want to piss off Steve Bannon, because Steve Bannon at that point, I guess, this must be post-election, and he's inside the White House, and he's got the ability to sic the Federal Trade Commission on Google in retaliation for Google enforcing its own actual advertising policy. And so their solution is not to block all Google ads from being served at the Breitbart.com URL, but to say, well, if there are articles that they run that you claim are evidence that they violate our policy by running, either targeted racist articles or fake news or what have you, I don't know what the policy includes, show us those articles. And their solution is, well, we will stop allowing ads from Google to be served when people view those articles on Breitbart.com. That's why you get the eye roll. This was a whole new policy Google brought in just to appease a website that is built on Islamophobic, sexist, anti-poor, and racist commentary. The whole place is built on that. That's true. We'll turn it off on some of their pages. And then let's see. Google is in a real bind now, he has to say about the current situation with the Federalist and Zero Hedge. They don't want people to be paying attention to their bogus ad policies. This is what happens when you have spineless executives and selective policy enforcement. He's using the tweet of Scott Nover from Adweek, tweeting about the Federalist Society's story. And a Google spokesperson that this person, Nover spoke to, says NBC News got it wrong. Here's where the clarification came in. Google says the Federalist was notified they could be demonetized, but hasn't yet been. They can still remedy by, deleting all their content, basically, is how they would remedy that. Google says also the site's comments section, not any articles, were the ones in violation. Okay, so that's a good loophole for them too. William Fitzgerald continues and displays the sign-on letter that they wrote way back when. Years later, Google still makes money from Breitbart, and Breitbart from them as well, as it turns out. Also, Breitbart reported about this letter in 2018 when they doxed a few of us who worked on the letter. One of the alt-right Google workers leaked it to them. So they have alt-right workers inside of Google as well. And things go in both directions there. P.S. He says, the only reason I'm posting this stuff today is because I'm supposed to write a report at work today and looking for anything else to provide a distraction. So, okay. Personal note for him. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. And I thought also interesting was the fact that sleeping giants never knew that they had allies on the inside. But they go on to comment on the situation just a little bit more, pointing out the obvious. What good are rules if you don't enforce them? They were written by the ad networks themselves, and the least they could do is follow them. But thanks to William Fitz for sharing this story and internally trying to hold Google to their own standards. By the way, Sleeping Giants continues, even after 3,000 of their own employees signed a letter asking why Breitbart didn't break their terms, and 4,300 of their customers asking that ads no longer be placed there, Breitbart remains on the Google Ads network. Pretty unreal. If you want to see what happens when they allow this, check out Steve Bannon saying that before we came around, Sleeping Giants that is, they were pulling in $8 million in free cash flow from ads. Advertisers that didn't even know they were paying them, by the way. And, here's a little clip of Steve Bannon explaining that to, I guess, some alt-right figures who are, for some reason, willing to be filmed sitting down eating dinner with Bannon, and the key phrase here, disparaging the work of Sleeping Giants and saying they're the worst. Interesting. I don't know where the film comes from, but Sleeping Giants would certainly know. And they've been very effective in cutting back, at least on that number. And if they can't defund them entirely, even in Google Ads, they've diminished their income stream from them, and that's important work. All right, let's see. There's some additional items in the thread here, but I think that we've pretty much encapsulated all of that. Let's head back to Pocket. There are a couple of other interesting items probably to share. Let's see, that looks like a Friday item to me right there. Scrolling back, I want to go back and, in time we've been trying to go back over the last couple of days to pick up on stories that we haven't had time for in the past. And all right, let's see. We've hit on one here. This is an interesting one that I wish that we had had more time. We can probably end with today from, let's see, Yahoo News. John Ward, senior political correspondent in Yahoo News, wrote this headline that caught my attention a few days ago. It caught my attention a few days ago, but it was written quite some time ago. It was recirculated in the wake of all the recent events. This was written, though, in August of 2019, August 6, 2019, how a criminal investigation in Georgia set an ominous tone for African-American voters. I guess this part of the ongoing investigation of how swingy can Georgia get in its voting, and how much voter suppression is really going on there, and how are they targeting it. And some of the more egregious examples happening, as you might imagine, in Georgia. This is datelined Quitman, Georgia. Nancy Dennard, D-E-N-N-A-R-D, was in a festive holiday mood when police arrived at her front door in the early morning of December 21st, 2010. So we're going way back here on this one, but this is an important story. If you're not, I don't know, none of us listening to the program, I'm sure, are unconvinced by the examples given when we talk about the way voter suppression is executed in this country, whether it's reducing the number of polling places or making sure that only broken voting machines turn up at heavily black precincts, etc., stuff like that. People threatening to patrol the area and challenge the right of those who show up to exercise their right to vote. I forgot what they called the name of the practice of sending people who are on your voter rolls letters, and if they don't respond to the letters in a certain amount of time, they're purged from the voter rolls. All of these sort of things. It goes way beyond that, and this is an amazing example of it, and brings to mind somebody else who was just recently in the news too, and I forget exactly. I think he may have put his book out. We're all going to read the Bolton book, hopefully for free, apparently. And Don Siegelman, I think, has a book out now. I think that was why he was back in the news, and some of you, that's a throwback. For some of you who may or may not recall his story, Google him. The former governor of, it's Alabama, right? Last Democrat to occupy the job, and see what happened with him. This will remind you of his story from Quitman, Georgia. Nancy Dennard, festive mood. Remember all of this when police arrived at her door early in the morning of December 21st, 2010. Her son's birthday on Christmas Eve was 3 days away, part of the festive mood, and he was supposed to arrive in town the next day. Dennard, a county school board member who had just turned 50 and recently helped elect a slate of new candidates, slept in that morning and was still in bed when her husband left for work a little after 7 a.m. She thought it odd when he returned a few minutes later to wake her. "There's some people here that want to see you," he told her. "They're law enforcement." And that's never a good sign. Dennard was taken away in handcuffs, placed in a squad car, and spirited into the police station. The early morning arrest began a multi-year nightmare for the mother of two. The state government, operating under the authority of a newly appointed Secretary of State named Brian Kemp, he's the governor now, arrested Dennard and 11 of her political allies and charged them with 120 separate felonies. To Dennard and her allies, who became known as the Quitman 10 plus 2, that's 12, but there must be a reason for the 10 plus 2, the reasons for their arrest were simple. They were black candidates who won an election in the Deep South, upsetting a white-dominated power structure. They thought they could make an example out of me, and that would kill the spirit of this movement, said Dennard, who has a master's degree in speech pathology as well as an educational doctorate. I knew we had done nothing wrong. Yet, the mug shots taken at the jail that first day of African Americans wearing orange jumpsuits would be an enduring image. The photos were plastered across newspaper front pages, broadcast repeatedly on local TV news, and finally displayed on the screens of Fox News viewers as evidence of voter fraud. Here's a picture of the front page of the Quitman Free Press. Arrests made in voter fraud case. And there's the lineup of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all black, and it looks like they may all be women, although, no, there we are. I can see, zooming in, I can see the names. All black suspects, quote unquote, under that headline. Arrests made in voter fraud case. These are the people who won, but they beat white people, so they must be arrested for something. The perceived threat of organized voter fraud has been used for the past decade by Republicans to enact a series of measures in many states that have made it harder to vote, especially for poor and non-white voters. In fact, of course, you know, they're out there now saying vote by mail is fraud per se, according to the president this time. Kemp in Georgia has been one of the most aggressive politicians involved in purging voters from the rolls. Kemp and his aides often spoke of how they were, quote, fighting to protect the integrity of our elections. Quitman became a poster child case among conservatives that voter fraud was a real and serious threat. Look, here's a headline and some pictures. So many absentee ballots flooded in, it set off suspicions of possible hanky-panky. Wow, hanky-panky. Look out for that. Fox News anchor Eric Shawn crowed in a 2012 segment in which he described what happened in Quitman. The Quitman case was the first major investigation under Kemp during his time as Secretary of State, and it set the tone for his tenure, and it paved the path to his quote-unquote election as well. It also provided fodder for Republicans around the country who argued that voter fraud is a significant problem, despite a lack of evidence of any widespread or large-scale examples. In more recent years, President Trump himself has raised the specter of voter fraud to argue without any proof that he was cheated in the 2016 election, and that's why he lost the popular vote to Democrat Hillary Clinton. But for Dennard and the rest of the Quitman 10 plus 2, the events of 2010 were far more than a talking point in a broader political battle. It created an impression in the African American community that any attempts to aggressively claim the right to vote would be punished, and the punishments portrayed as an act of justice. And you should read the rest of this article, and it's very lengthy, and I probably should just have dedicated all of Friday to it instead. But I kind of wanted to get this one on the record and at least get it started. Yahoo News interviewed 24 people involved in the case, including members of the Quitman 10 plus 2 prosecutors, the local officials and state law enforcement officials as well who were on the case. Yahoo News also reviewed more than 1,100 pages of documents obtained through open records laws from the Georgia Secretary of State and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The Quitman story, according to the records and interviews, is of an overzealous law enforcement response to a school board election, which exacerbated racial divisions and demonstrates how voter suppression plays out at the local level. The Quitman story also helps explain why many, especially in the African American community, look at the policies Kemp enacted during his time as Secretary of State and see them as part of a larger pattern in Georgia and in many other states around the country where the law, government authority, and conservative media are used to try to intimidate them away from exercising political power. It's incidents like these that prompted Stacey Abrams, when she ran for governor against Kemp in 2018, to say during their debate that voter suppression isn't only about blocking the vote, it's also about creating an atmosphere of fear. So you should, by all means, read the rest if we never get to reading the rest of this fantastic story. Well raised once again. It was good of them to point it out in the current context. Good to keep in mind, both as we consider the possibility of Stacey Abrams running for higher office and Brian Kemp continuing to cheat on behalf of Republicans in Georgia, and the disgraced exit, we hope, entirely from the political scene of Chris Kobach, who made a career of following up on Kemp's work and taking it even further.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, time now to hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, although I did want to squeeze one other thing in there. I did find in my search for the tweets about Chris Kobach that this was not the first time he has lost control of firearms. He's a repeat offender in this thing. All right, Justice, take it away. Round it all up.